Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Okay, and I'll just take really just 2 minutes to say a couple of things. And the firstly is to emphasise a point that's been made about risk. This is all about getting the appropriate return for the risk that you take. Now, sovereign wealth funds are long-term, or they're savings funds. They're long-terms, they're contrarian, they're patient capital, and they can accept illiquidity. I was talking to a fund the other day. It hasn't got its first payout until 2080. That's its time horizon for liquidity. So it can take that on long-term illiquidity in an investment at the appropriate rate. But then and that's a clear point about risk. That has to come down, and I think it was Jared mentioned risk and 40% in terms of a plan, and that's the result that you get. But all actors need to be aware of that. So one of the ways to address that is a number of sovereign wealth funds actually have skin in the game in their domestic markets. They're called strategic funds. Now, they recently met in Africa and Rwanda, and what they're trying to do is actually at scale is put together, and there are other institutions like Hubert's Green Infrastructure Investment, but they're trying to put together those projects at scale and de-risk them at a governmental level by having a government-sponsored fund that's actually involved. So that way takes out some of that broad political risk. And of course, they're populated by people like yourselves who've got experience of markets and what's required. So that is going on. So there is active work. And the point of that, there's a good example of this in India. NIIF established a fund. The Indian government invested in it. It established a proper portfolio of investment. It established a whole private equity approach, and that's actually owned by 2 sovereign wealth funds, or at least in part, ADIA and GIC. So there are good examples that work. And then the final point I'd make is really to people in this room as much as anyone else. Somebody mentioned the green bond market reaching a certain amount. Now, it's clear that there's demand from investors for these kind of investments. However, if in that market there is greenwashing and they're not real investments, A, it takes money away that could potentially be invested in developing markets, and B, it sours the reputation for everybody in terms of that. So my plea to you would be make sure you keep a strong eye on that and take a stand if you see something that you don't think is appropriate.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.